Good morning, everyone. My name's Toby Catchpole from Gloucestershire County Council. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's session on the archaeology of Gloucester. Just to start with, you may have noticed the day is being organised by the Committee for Archaeology in Gloucestershire. The Committee for Archaeology of the Bristol and Gloucestershire Archaeological Society, which is the new, hopefully more geographically inclusive name of the former Committee for Archaeology in Gloucestershire. So we definitely want to include Bristol in future events. This event was postponed in both 2020 and 2021 for obvious reasons, but thanks to a kind offer from Cotswold Archaeology to host this webinar, we're finally able to proceed today. We've had over 300 people sign up via Eventbrite, and that's a great result. We should give thanks to Kaz Adams and Martin Watts at Cotswold Archaeology for arranging the booking system and sorting the technical details. And if you have any technical questions, please put those in the Q&A box and we'll try to help where we can. Please feel free to use the chat box to say hello, and where you're dialing in from at the start of the session, this facility will be closed in about 10 minutes time. The raised hand facility won't be available today, but please add any questions you have during talks to the Q&A box, and these will be visible to the hosts and panelists. And we will have question and answer sessions at the end of the morning and afternoon talks. My job will be to attempt to keep the speakers to time. We should have 25 minutes with a little bit of wiggle room for each talk. We have a combination of live talks and pre-recorded versions where the speaker isn't able to attend in person today. We won't be able to ask questions directly of those who can't be here today, but Andy Armstrong's got a lot of knowledge about these sites in Gloucester. Hopefully him or one of us will be able to answer any questions that you have. Just to let everybody know, the session is being recorded and it'll be available to view in approximately 2 weeks' time. And finally, on my technical tick list, which is I'm afraid I'm having to look at every minute, there'll be a short survey when you sign out, which take less than 5 minutes to complete. And the results of this will help us evaluate how the session's gone and give us ideas for future ones. We originally planned an event in 2020 for the then CAG Symposium due to the unprecedented amount of archaeology that was being undertaken in Gloucester City. And this has only continued to the present day. I'm sure many of us have enjoyed Andy Armstrong's regular social media updates on the sites. And the plan for today is to learn far more about several of the recent projects and also to put them into the context of longer running studies in the city. I hope you all enjoy the day and it's informative and interesting. Our first two talks relate to projects out in the suburbs of Gloucester, starting with Paolo Guarino from Cotswold Archaeology. Paolo learnt his trade in London, Italy and Turkey. He joined Cotswold Archaeology in 2015 and he's recently moved from being a fieldwork projects officer to the post-excavation team. He's going to talk to us about a fascinating Roman rural site to the east of the city at Barnwood, which included a rare lime kiln. Paolo, over to you.
Hi, thank you very much, Toby. Hello, everyone. Here is my presentation. Right, there we go. The Wells Bridge Roman settlement. Well, first of all, I'm very grateful that I've been asked to talk about this site. It's a site I wasn't directly involved with during the excavation, during the fieldwork, but I'm working on it now as a publication officer. Just to give you an idea of where it's located, for those who don't know the area, Barnwood is a parish just to the east of the centre of Gloucester. As you can see from this map, it's along the yellow line, which is the projected route of the Ermine Street, which used to join Glevum, Gloucester, to Ancorinium, Cirencester. The site is located where the big yellow dot is. Just to give you another view, with more current reference point. To the north and west of the site, there is a Birmingham to Gloucester railway. To the east is the A40, and to the south is the A417. Now, this is, as many of you might already know, this is a development-led project. The project was instigated by a planning application that was placed for the site, and the application was, the planning permission was granted with an archaeological condition, a condition to do some archaeological work. The reason, one of the reasons why the city archaeologists wanted to do some archaeological work is because the site was well known from previous archaeological interventions. So just to give you a bit of background, back in the 70s, in the early 70s, when the A40 was being built and Horsebeer Brook was being redirected underneath the new road, Mr. Rose kept a watching brief effectively along the area where the works were being done, and he spotted two large ditches which are these two brown lines which contain the Roman materials. And during the watching brief kept along the area of the new where the brook was being relocated, was Rose was able to observe the remains of what she thought might have been high status Roman building. The reason for which is that he identified debris, building rubbles from including tessera, presumably coming from a mosaic floor, painted wall plaster, and various other elements that made him think that the presence of a high status building must have been nearby. Later on, during another development-led project run by Foundation Archaeology in 1998, the site was, an area very close to the site was evaluated, and evaluation identified an area very close to the original Rose ditches to the north of the site, and another area farther south where they decided to open up to later excavations. Now, the first one to the north revealed a few cremations burials, and everything else was taken away by these big black bubbles like things, which are the representation of Roman quarry pits. To the south of their site, they identified some more interesting remains of the corner of what it was thought to be a possible enclosure, with two other ditches running along the southwest of one of the outer ditches of the enclosure, and they thought it might have been a trackway or something along those lines. By the way, the dotted lines are my additions, purely speculative at the time, and what made this site particularly interesting at the time was the fact that within the corner of this enclosure, where our colleagues from Foundation Archaeology found the remains of cemetery. Cemetery which had burials both within and without a smaller enclosure. And in particular, one remarkable find was finding of a stone sarcophagus with a lead urn inside. Now, this is probably, I mean, these findings are the reasons why, when he came to it, Andrew Armstrong requested for an excavation to be carried out within the site enclosed within the red line. So CEA excavation, so there you go. So in between September 2020 and February 2021.
I don't think, in this phase of the operation.
Sorry, I can hear someone talking. Is there a question for me? Oh, no. Sorry, I was going to say, so from between September 2020 and February 2021, we went back to site, and this is what was found during the excavation. Now, this is a slightly simplified plan of the results, just to make them more visible. And as to make them more visible, I removed from this plan all the medieval and post-medieval region forests, remains of the region forest, which covered a large part of the site. But anyway, from what you can see on this plan, we basically, our colleagues on site identified a large number of intercutting ditches, indicating that, you know, a settlement that underwent a sequence of remodeling phases. What is striking is clearly the way the remains found during the 2020-2021 excavation match the remains identified by Foundation Archaeology in 1998-99. Now in this presentation, with the following slides, I will be going through the various periods of identified during the excavation and try to highlight, discuss some of the most interesting finds. So first of all, overall, we basically, since the beginning, there was the impression that we were dealing with multi-phase Roman settlement. Now that we started looking at the pottery, at the material remains, we can say that basically the main period of activity is concentrated between the 2nd and 4th century AD. And from the stratigraphic evidence, we were able to identify, at least preliminary, 5 main periods of occupation and remodeling. Now, the first period, as quite often happens in this kind of rural settlements, is basically represented by just a scatter of small ditch segments and few pits and postholes. And in these plans are indicated with the green color. As you see, it's quite difficult to identify them because there are not many of them, and they're covered by other things. Anyway, there's a concentration in the south corner and again on the northeast corner. Unfortunately, we don't have much dating evidence from these features, but given the fact that they were cut through by later 2nd century features, we were speculating that it might have been roughly early to mid-Roman in date. The second phase, period 2, is in yellow. I will go through these individual phases in the next slides, but just to give you the rough periods, we got mid-Roman, the first mid-Roman period, 2nd to 3rd century, another second phase of mid-Roman, 2nd to 3rd century, period 3, period 4, was dated to the 3rd and 4th century, mid to late Roman, and then period 5, whatever is left of the settlements, seem to date to the late 4th century. Now, to move on, as I was saying, period 1, we haven't got much of it, so I won't be able to, I won't entertain you for very long with it. In fact, I'll move straight into period 2, which was basically characterized by a series of ditches that seem to establish some lines in the landscape, establish some field boundaries, and at least, and the interesting thing about these boundaries and these lines is that, at least in some cases, they seems to recur and be maintained multiple times, even in the later phases of occupation. In this particular case, we have, at least in this southern, well, in the central area of the site, in the southern part of this period 2 activity, we got a number of northwest southeast aligned ditches that intercut each other and probably basically represent a desperate attempt of these people to keep this area dry, because as you can imagine, this was a very wet area, flood prone, and probably the fact that we got so many ditches dated to the same period suggests that there was a frequent needs of maintenance. In the northern part of the site, we got some of the most interesting features are attributed to this period. First of all, some of these parallel, quite a few of these little parallel ditches were identified, and my colleagues on site interpreted them as possible bedding trenches, which is quite interesting, given that we are in a rural settlement, and it's most plausible because they were small parallel ditches, all very much the same size. Among these ditches, there was a scatter of pits, 2 or 3 pits, roughly all the same size, and were backfilled in a slightly unusual way, in the sense that they weren't your usual, say, waste pit filled with, random domestic waste or just naturally silted up. One of them was entirely filled up with stones, and another one, which is the one you see in the picture, was filled with what we would call possibly a structured deposition. So there are a couple of almost complete vessels, both of them dated to second to 3rd century AD, and a number of stones possibly used from nearby buildings, and at the bottom of this pile of stones there was also the entire skull of a sheep. Now these deposits are per se quite interesting, because basically they give an interesting insight on what people were using at that time, and the fact that probably the main area of activity wasn't too far, but we being relatively isolated, we can't really see much more about it. Now, the very impressive find of this period is lime kiln, identified on the northeastern side of edge of the site, and probably truncated by at least towards the end of its life, partly truncated by the alluvial deposits that accumulated along the Orsbeer brook. Now, the reason why this is the start of the show, at least for this period, so to speak, is that this is quite rare, at least in this country. I believe this is one of 17 found so far in the whole country. The first one in Gloucestershire, if I'm correct, and one of 3 or 4 in the whole of the southwest. Now, this is relatively well preserved. As you can see, is built entirely with stone blocks, built against cut in the natural clay. Is just to give you an idea, is about 4 meters across at the top, narrows down towards the base, and it is interesting because it seems to be fairly short-lived. And I mean, for those who are not familiar with this kind of structures, lime kilns were essentially used to produce quick lime, which was then used for plasters or other kind of building materials in normally high status buildings, which was naturally linked with the remains identified by Rose in 1977 only to the east of the site. I thought I would give you some images of what the kiln looked as it was being excavated. One interesting feature about this kiln that hasn't got any parallels to with other kilns, at least among the ones found in this country, is the wall that you see seems to be going through the middle of the what would have been the main stoke hole of the kiln. Now we're not 100% sure that the two structures were connected, as there is no direct stratigraphic connections other than the fact that both of them were cut within the same ground. But it is only natural to assume that there was a somehow connection. So I mean, the analysis of this site is still ongoing, is still preliminary, and hopefully comparisons with other examples, perhaps in Europe, will illuminate on the possible function of this wall. As you see from this image, the what would have been the front part of the kiln has been truncated away. And I thought I would show you briefly some images of the section that was recorded along, well, perpendicular to the entrance of the kiln. And as you see, basically, once the kiln was abandoned and started collapsing, accumulation of various deposits occurred until it was truncated first by period 3 ditches, and then by alluvial deposits or paleochannel, possibly associated with activity of the Horse Brook. Now, as I said, one of the ditches of the later phase went straight through the kiln, the remains of the kiln, and just as a seal of the fact that the kiln wasn't being used anymore. Now, these are we're looking now at the remains from period 2, period 3, which is perhaps the period when the largest amount of remodeling and reshaping of the settlement took place. So up to the previous period, the site was relatively contained. Now we got what looks like a fairly complex organization. So we got a large square enclosure, of which we got 2 corners, thanks to the excavation carried out in 1998. Now, just to give you an idea, from corner to corner, we're looking at about 220 meters. So it's quite quite substantial space that was enclosed within this area. And again, another what initially was thought it might have been a double-ditched enclosure, it now seems to be confirmed to be a trackway that led quite nicely towards the this north west corner of the enclosure. The trackway, just to give you an idea, didn't have much in terms of surfaces, except from these very small fragment of metal surface. We don't know whether this was actually part of the metalling of the trackway, or whether it was an area that was consolidated to avoid, cart and animals bogging down, etc. Anyway, another interesting fact about is a little bit of metalling surface is that it was made of stones and tiles and CBM of various nature. And one of the bits of tiles was found among these was inscripted, had, well, it was stamped with the stamp of Publius Aelius Finitus, which was apparently one of the local magistrates in active in Gloucester. Unfortunately, we haven't got. I was hoping to have a very precise date based on this name, but apparently we don't. But as I said, all the analysis is still preliminary, so we'll see how it goes. Watch this space. Now, the other very interesting feature and element that comes in as a novelty with this period is a building. So what was found in the northwest corner of this enclosure were the remains of a large rectangular building with a small ancillary structure to the side. These had, just to show you what it looked like on site, these had some stone foundations were visible. In most cases, we had mostly rubbed out walls that still drew the lines on the ground, but obviously they're harder to see. Hopefully this is going to help a bit. But basically we're looking at a very substantial building. Unfortunately, there was hardly no evidence of surfaces or internal deposits to allow us to speculate on the function of the building, but given the size, the shape, and given the overall setting, rural setting of the settlement, it was interpreted as possible farm building, a barn or something along those lines. When the ditches that formed the trackway and the main enclosure were backfilled, there was another big ditch that went through those fields, through those ditches, clearly indicating that those ditches weren't in use anymore, and clearly indicating the need for a total reshape of the settlement. I say total, but in fact there were some elements that were kept from the previous settlements, and that's why I kept the buildings here, which seems to be still in place in this period, and seems to be they seem to be indicated by the fact that one of the ditches that used to go around the north and eastern side of the site is still in use, and in fact was recut during this period 4, and seems to stop exactly here, where there might have been an access to the buildings. Now, in a purely speculative way, I drew this line to show a possible connection between the ditches that Rose found in 1977 and these period 4 ditch. Obviously, we don't have any secure evidence to state this, but I thought I would make the connection. I'll show you the connection, because I think it's something we should be working on, especially when the fines reports are finalized, etc. It would be nice to see if there is any specific evidence for the for the chronological relationship between the stitches. Now, one interesting find from the fields of this large new large enclosure ditch is this crossbow brooch, apparently Keller type 3, my notes says, is one of the least common Roman brooch forms, apparently, and possibly was reserved for the military or high-ranking officials, and is dated to the 4th century. Another interesting feature from this site is a pit that truncates is dug straight into the ditches that earlier on marked the trackway, and is interesting because it contains a large amount of grains and charred material, charred vegetable material, and including evidence of processing of these grains, which I thought it was interesting, given that we are within a farm, a still working farm, and could perhaps confirm that we're still not far from a living area. Period 5, just very quickly, as you can see, it's fairly barren. We haven't got anything left. Basically, the site was effectively abandoned, or at least in large part abandoned. The enclosures weren't used anymore. We only have a small amount of features that cut through these enclosures, and some deposits were called demolition deposits or abandonment deposits. The interesting finds from these periods are a set of 3 or 4 ovens, smallish ovens that were, just like any other pit, but the bases were lined with tiles, stones, and large pots, and the sides and bases were clearly affected by high temperature. So fire being in situ. The other feature that cuts through the ditches, the earlier ditches, period 3 ditches, and was found momentarily attributed to this period, is the only burial identified on site. Now, during the excavation, there was the impression that some of the earlier pits and some of the period 5 pits were actually cremations, but now these have been taken back to the labs and been analyzed. No human bone, no cremated human bones were identified in them. So this is effectively the only burial we got on site. The last interesting thing about this period is that this demolition deposit was found covering most of the earlier features, was packed with metal objects and pottery dating from the 2nd to the 4th century AD, suggesting that was probably an area where some material from previous features was collected, perhaps to level up a lower area. Just to give an idea of what happened after the abandonment of the site at the end of the 4th century, I wanted to show you this image, which is the original survey from the excavation, including a large number of furrows. Can you see this? These green-gray lines effectively covered the whole site, and as you can imagine, made very, very difficult for our colleagues on site to make any sense of it. I appreciate I got a minute left. I'll be very, very quick. Another thing that these furrows did was they churned quite a lot of material from the features underneath, and this is one of the reasons why quite a lot of our finds actually came from metal detecting. Now, there's some very interesting finds. We got these plate brooch, type 9 in Macret continental typology, and which, as you can see, is circular in shape. It's got 3 enameled rings and a stud in the middle, and dates between the 2nd and the 3rd century AD. These beautiful spearhead, which dates to late Roman or perhaps even early Saxon. And these coins, these are just 2 of 31 coins found on site, and unfortunately only 6 of these 31 coins were found in situ. The rest were found from subsoil or in later features like furrows, for example. Then, just to finish, I just want to remind everyone that it's very, very hard sometimes to make any sense at all what we find on site, and not only because the archaeology is not always easy to deal with, but also because the weather sometimes provide interesting challenges. The site flooded several times in multiple occasions. It was snowed on, and despite it all, I think our colleagues did an amazing job by making sense of most of the areas on site. And with this, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you for Cotswold Archaeology for giving me the opportunity to present the site, and thank you to our archaeologists on site who did an amazing job. Sorry for being slightly late.
Thank you, Paolo. That was fascinating. That's a very atypical site from rural Gloucestershire, in my experience. So I think there's a lot more to be said about it during the post-excavation process.